morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined by Nomiki Konst. Nomiki, good morning. Good to see you again. Absolutely. Happy Friday.
11 days, 10 days? How many days?
I think 11 days, actually, that we are out from the election, and the final New York Times Siena College poll is out as well. The poll found that Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are locked in a dead heat. Harris and Trump both are tied with 48% of voters. The Times says Trump has done well on immigration, while Harris has done well narrowing the gap on voters' trust in her on the economy.
Harris was in Georgia last night alongside President Obama and Bruce Springsteen, who did not hold back on Trump. Let's watch.
Donald Trump is running to be an American tyrant. He does not understand this country, its history, or what it means to be deeply American.
Trump, meanwhile, was in Arizona last night where he said this about our country.
Right, and we're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to we're like a garbage can.
Trump's running mate J.D. Vance was in Detroit where he did a town hall with News Nation. Let's take a look.
If you're discarding a lifelong friendship because somebody votes for the other team, then you've made a terrible, terrible mistake and you should do something different. Like, don't cast aside. Like, most of my family obviously is going to vote for, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And if they're not, actually, I need to talk to them. But I've got friends who like me personally, acquaintances who aren't necessarily going to vote for me. That doesn't make them bad people. And we can't, this is my most important advice, whether you vote for me, whether you vote for Donald Trump, whether you vote for Kamala Harris, don't cast aside family members and lifelong friendships. Politics is not worth it. And I think if we follow that principle, we'll heal the divide in this country.
All eyes will be on both candidates over the next coming days as Trump will appear alongside podcaster Joe Rogan today, while Harris will be alongside Queen Bee, Beyonce, tonight in Texas, and will also be interviewed by podcaster Brene Brown. This is pretty crazy. I mean, the gender gap is stark, as we know, but the campaigns are not holding back and showing that the gender gap is strong. Beyonce showing up in Texas. Texas is interesting right now because you do see Ted Cruz and Colin Allred, Representative Allred, really neck and neck in a state that I think Democrats had wrongfully blown off for years. And now you see that they're within the margin of error. Mitch McConnell has held back funding. Ted Cruz has complained about not receiving funding from Mitch McConnell for whatever reason that may be. And I think it's smart for Kamala Harris to show up with Beyonce of all people in Houston and on Brene Brown's podcast, which is, a heavily female audience. I think they're just really leaning into that base at this point.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Trump is trying to widen his margin with men. And the question, of course, is who's going to have the bigger margin that can overcome their opponent's favor with one gender or the other. I'm interested in Texas, too, because I do see that the Senate race is very close. If I had to guess, I would say Cruz might win by 2 or 3 points, just based on what I've seen from the polling so far. But I am curious if it is a good idea for Kamala to be working on these down ballot races when she could be potentially in a swing state for the presidential amid a very, very dead heat.
I think, listen, the polls are definitely close, right? They're close across the board within the margin of error in every single battleground state and even in battleground bellwether districts, congressional districts, Senate districts, as you would say. With that being said, there is another play here in that Texas is also ground zero for the most restrictive abortion laws in the country, and that is a key theme in the campaign. I do think that she has the opportunity to lean into states like Florida, Texas, North Carolina that maybe a cycle ago or several cycles ago, in the case of Texas, were on the map. We're seeing some stuff on the ground that I think is transformative. I think the electoral map is going to be very different on November 6th, maybe 15th, we don't know. Whenever we find out the election results, I think that the map is going to look very different than what it has in previous years. So she's going to use it as an opportunity not just to rally the forces in Houston and with Beyonce, where she's from Houston, but also to talk about these restrictive abortion laws, which is a narrative that resonates around the country. And that's also what's happening in Texas with Colin Allred, is that because of these abortion laws, so many women in Texas, including Latinas, for the first time in history, are moving more pro-choice. So that might be the factor in Texas. it's probably going to be the factor if Kamala Harris were to win, which I think is going to happen across the board, is that you're just seeing abortion is such a moving topic because it's not just about pro-choice at this point. It's about what comes next. We didn't think that this was actually going to be on the table, and now it is. And so what comes afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, we do know that the economy and immigration are still the top two issues, although abortion is usually in number three compared to those. I was initially very critical of Kamala's decision to go to Texas, and then Tim Walz going to Kentucky to lobby on behalf or against the school choice measure that is being voted on. But then you see Trump doing a Madison Square Garden event and campaigning in places like New York and California. So I think what they're both trying to do is bring salience to the issues that benefit their ticket, even if it's not necessarily in a swing state where they need to whip voters. And we'll see if that pays off for either of them come Tuesday. One thing that I think will pay off is Trump doing this Joe Rogan interview. This is the #1 podcast in the world, millions of viewers on every single episode, and he's doing it just about a week out from the election. I think the episode is supposed to drop either this weekend or on Monday. I mean, talk about the gender gap. This is a hugely influential podcast with men in particular. It's very independent-minded. Joe Rogan has not endorsed either candidate. He says he's been sort of a Bernie Sanders fan in the past. I mean, what do you think? Should Kamala have gone on Joe Rogan as well, or do you think the Brene Brown podcast is enough to offset it?
You know, I think that Kamala Harris should take every opportunity, and we don't know what happened at the end of the day, why the decision was made, if it was on her end or their end, or they were negotiating certain terms. I mean, there's so many factors at play here. With that being said, you know, Brene Brown this is about base at this point, and I think if they know where their numbers are with young men in particular that, you know, under the age of 35, I don't even know if Donald Trump will win the margin he needs. I mean, turnout is everything for everyone at this point. So I don't know if she can sway those listeners at this point, and those who would be swayed are probably already tuning into other podcasts and aware of where she is. I mean, this is again about undecideds, and it's about motivating a base. That's not her base, and she's speaking to undecideds in other places. So I think both ends right now are focusing, at least on the podcast side, on moving their base. And Brene Brown, you know, and the other side of this is young men are, unfortunately, not as reliable of voters, and we don't even know if they're. I know registration is up, but we don't know who the registration is up with, if it's with young men, if they're going to turn out after they're registered. I mean, there's a lot of to overcome in terms of moving a voter from being unregistered and having no experience in voting into getting them to the polls, especially with an unreliable group of voters.
Yeah, we do know that the Republicans have eaten into the Democratic registration advantage in places like Arizona and Pennsylvania. On the topic of, you were mentioning, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. Women.
Yeah, women.
No, I mean, it's
oh, sorry,
yes.
you were talking about turning out the bases.
Yes.
I was kind of surprised as well to see that just about a week and a half ago that Kamala Harris decided to launch this Hunters and Anglers for Harris Walz. And I thought that was a little strange to do that this late in the election cycle, especially as we see outdoorsmen, generally speaking, tend to be Republican.
I mean, some of that is Tim Walz. Tim Walz knows that base because he is that base. He understands that it's not necessarily a partisan issue to be an outdoorsman. Maybe there is some, I don't know, there's probably no polling on this, to be honest, but there's probably generalized conceptions of what it means to be an outdoorsman. But he's from Wisconsin. He's from Minnesota. He knows the Rust Belt states and I mean, he was talking about how he has guns and he goes out and he can outshoot anybody.
Yeah, but then he totally blew it because they did that pheasant hunt and he couldn't load a shotgun.
What do I know about that?
I don't know.
I mean, you know who else can't? Dick Cheney.
Well, that's also fair, and he's supporting Kamala Harris. We have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising. We'll be back right after this.